Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight for the Game Changers event, the Global Game Changers event, Exporting Intelligence, Australia's Software Advantage in a Shifting Global Economy. My name is Alicia Barry, and I would like to welcome you all here in the Great Hall at UTS with me tonight for this event. And also welcome to those who are joining us virtually as well. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. I'm a business and finance host at the ABC, and it's quite a treat to be out of the studio tonight and here with you. I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose land we are on tonight. I would also like to pay respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various ancestral lands that our online attendees are on at the moment, and pay respect to those elders past and present. So it's an interesting time to be an exporter at the moment, with Donald Trump's tariff and trade policies spawning protectionism and sending financial and currency markets into a spin. We wake up to headlines daily about the latest development in the US-China trade war. So how is this going to affect Australia's software exports? Well, you know heavyweights like Atlassian, Canva, WiseTech Global, even Technology One, but more broadly, as Lucy Ellis has pointed to, digital exports topped $7.5 billion last year, proving that code travels faster than commodities. So tonight we are asking, where is global demand heading for software? How is AI transforming productivity? And what will it take for Australia to sharpen its edge and scale faster as a software exporter? Well, we have a very esteemed panel to answer those questions for you tonight. Firstly, we have Dr. Terry Roach, the founder and CEO of Capsify, a Sydney-based software company. Now, Terry has a PhD in enterprise architecture and more than 25 years of experience in software and business design, and he's obviously taken Australian-built software to the world. Welcome, Terry. Next to him is Lucy Ellis, the chief economist at Westpac. She has spent 3 decades at the Reserve Bank of Australia prior to this role, including as Assistant Governor, and brings deep expertise in trade, productivity and policy to help business and government navigate shifting economic conditions, which of course is what we're here to talk about tonight. And Professor Asif Gill leads software engineering here at UTS. He's an expert in agile and secure digital systems, working with industry and government on digital resilience and preparing Australia's engineers for an AI-driven future. And then David Masters is next to him. He leads global policy and regulatory affairs at Atlassian. With more than 20 years of experience in tech public policy, he shapes strategies on trade, AI, privacy, and the settings that help Australian tech companies scale worldwide. Now, the way that this event will work tonight is we're going to engage in some discussion for 45 minutes or so, and then I would really love to bring in your questions. So please send them through. I think we might have the Slido app available for you. I think we can bring that up on a slide at some point, but that's the mechanism in which to submit questions, and I will get to as many of those as I possibly can. But I will take a seat now and we will begin. So Terry, I'd like to start with you. Okay. I have heard you describe yourself as an overnight success, 11 years in the making. Yeah, so can you tell us, how did you start Capsify? What did you do to get to this place now?
Sure. Well, I was probably untypical. I was probably a bit of a late starter as a founder. You don't normally see people my era with the audacity to go and think they can found a business. But I was midway through my career, came across some problems that I thought looked exciting. I couldn't figure out how to solve them. I decided to go back to uni, and late in life did a PhD, and that turned into some research that I managed to commercialize and turn into a business. And so for about 12 or 15 years, we gradually built a product on the basis of that research, and we eventually sold the company late last year.
Well, congratulations. That's wonderful. I imagine, Lucy, that the global macro environment that exists now is pretty different to what it was for Terry about 13 years ago when he first started on his endeavour. Can you give us a bit of a snapshot of what it's like for exporters at the moment, given the global headwinds I just mentioned?
Thanks, Alicia. Look, I think it really matters whether you're an exporter of goods or an exporter of services. And I think that's a really important distinction. It's very hard to tariff a lot of the services that Australia actually has a growing industry in. And it's not just the $7.5 billion of software licensing exports that's come from nothing 10 years ago, but over $8 billion of a category that the ABS has, that's just sort of management consulting and accounting and auditing. We're a highly educated white-collar society. We speak English. So where there are niches, there are opportunities. And I think particularly where you have services that are able to be delivered digitally and remotely, it becomes easier to locate wherever the right skills are or the right environment is. And it becomes less relevant where you're buying that software from. And you see that there's also vibrant software companies, small and mid-sized software companies in Europe as well. And I think people focus so much on those few big behemoths, they don't realise just how much value add is being made right across the industry. And it only takes, when we think about that $7.5 billion, you go to the public, the public accounts of Canva and Atlassian and WiseTech. It only takes a few winners to suddenly have that industry with that kind of export space. And there was no government plan to create that software export industry. And yet it's bigger than barley, it's bigger than cotton, it's bigger than aluminium.
Well, I'd like to pick up on that sort of idea. Asif Gill, how is Australia's software industry perceived? Because you think exports and you think stick some iron ore in a container and whack it on a ship to China.
Of course, if we burn them on a plastic, then we can export. But unfortunately, we don't do anymore, or that's not my time when I started my career. But I think it's living through the cloud, can deliver over the internet. So I think there's a less restriction around there. It could be consumed anywhere. So there are software, or I would say that export controls there, but I think still the software could be consumed. Just looking at the local Australian industry, so we are currently a $30 billion economy, about 1,600 around companies around there plus, and we're expecting that would be by 2030 would be about $40 billion economy. So there is an appetite, it's going to be increasing. There are a lot of digital initiative. Lucy mentioned about digitization. So that's going to actually increase the demand for the software. So I believe I'm very happy in a way as a software engineer and training people that there will be a lot of demand for software engineers. And yes, there is a concept of AI. AI can enhance productivity, and we talk further on that.
We will get to that. David, can you give us a bit of a picture of what the regulatory environment is like for software companies, developers, those starting out? What's working and what's not?
Yeah, I think to Lucy's point, there wasn't a real plan to grow the Australian software industry. It sort of happened organically, and part of that is because it was a fairly lowly regulated environment. So I think the bar was really low. I think it's becoming higher. I think what you're seeing is a sort of global patchwork of regulation, take privacy, cybersecurity laws. So to operate at a global scale, you have to meet a whole bunch of competing regulations that are increasingly inconsistent. So I think there's some challenges there. One of the things we're sort of pushing for is, take security incident reporting, for example. India has 6 hours, Australia is 24 hours, Europe's 72 hours. So there's a whole bunch of different regimes where, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out, rather than responding to the incident itself, figuring out how quickly you have to report to certain regulators of certain incidents, depending on the nature of it. So I think what we're saying to governments is that actually that kind of patchwork is not helpful. It's actually not going to give you the best outcome, because you actually want companies to be dealing with those issues rather than reporting to regulators. So I think there's an emerging, because it's new regulation, it's also, as companies have emerged, they haven't built the engines to deal with that regulation. So we're all trying to figure that out on the fly as well. And AI is sort of the new front of that regulatory regime, with the European AI Act and considerations for other, state legislation in the US, possibly the regulatory response here as well.
So it sounds like there's quite a lot of opportunity for Australia to step up and, fill demand. Lucy Ellis, how can services and software step into that role where the demand is?
Well, I think it really comes down to identifying the market and the need, and being in a position with the skills in Australia to actually deliver that. And, I would emphasise that, we're a small economy, but we are a highly educated one. I think one of the things that, distinguishes us, is that we have, while there are complaints about the regulatory environment, by and large, our institutions are reliable. We have a very pragmatic set of sort of, regulators, and, our sort of, our political process is very pragmatic. And so, there's a bit less sort of uncertainty around how things will play out in a regulatory sense. I mean, we do have a relatively safety-focused, low-risk appetite kind of environment in our regulatory architecture, but it's one that's also pragmatic. It comes down to being able to identify those needs. And of course, Australia has also got one of the highest population growth rates of any advanced economy, because we are an attractive place to live, and we can attract, even if we don't organically grow the skills, we can certainly attract them, and then have that cross-pollination between people who have recently become Australians, residents, and those who are more long-standing, and develop that really great base of capability.
And I guess that's where the education piece comes in. If we've got these people coming into Australia, perhaps we can sort of feed them into the education system in this space. But what about competition from overseas, particularly when it comes to salaries? We know that, Silicon Valley is throwing 7-figure salaries at the top talent. Asif Gill, I know that you are looking at how to, I suppose, prevent a brain drain. And we have an example, a video to play, of one of the students here at UTS who has actually chosen to stay here in Australia.
I see my career kind of changing all the time, because technology and the whole software industry is always changing. App development is not just you sitting down on a computer and just coding. It could actually fulfill a lot of different parts of me. So the design and the research and connecting to people, the storytelling, that sort of aspect of it, because app development is a lot more about kind of selling your story and selling the hard work that you've kind of come up with. I think I just want to be in a space of kind of leadership, and also just mentorship for the younger generation of software developers, designers, UX designers, researchers. I want to be that person that brings a lot of experience and teaches that to the next generation. In the Apple Foundation program, we are bringing a lot of women into app development. So we do a lot of programs around girls' high schools to help them learn about app development and what technology can be and what a career in technology can look like. So do I see myself going overseas to further my career? I would say, well, the straight answer is no. Only because I have established my roots here. I've been working with the community here. So I want to, I guess, use my resources and use my skills to improve the industry here. I can't help but look overseas and see there's so many other opportunities out there. But I think the main, I guess, foundation of my career is helping the communities here.
A lot of pride in that young girl's voice. She wants to stay here. Is that part of it?
Absolutely, Alicia. I think it's important to, I think people want to contribute to the community. And apart from just a financial gain, there is a sense of purpose as well, which probably we can hear through her words. So I think purpose-driven is a kind of a way the people are, maybe, and that drives a career. But I would also like to add that going proximity might not be an issue in future. I'm looking at 2030 beyond. People can work from anywhere, and people could probably exchange knowledge. And I think it's not necessarily a bad idea to going overseas for resetting. I call that resetting. You go reset yourself, learn something, come back. But if we talk particularly about US, I mean, I know some of my friends and colleagues, they moved over there recently. I think as overall, I have been all over the world. Australia is the best place to live. I have to admit that. I've been pretty much in the last 20 years everywhere, apart from certain countries, but mainly. And I believe that it's okay to go learn and come back, and then probably bring that knowledge here and build the bridges. And you can look at that also in a way. There might be a really attractive over in salaries or payouts, sense, but look at the cost of living over there and what you have to. It's a trade-off, right? It's a business. So I would say that that's a conscious choice.
And when it comes to that knowledge that people bring back, that it's at the uni, how do we commercialise it? Dr. Terry Roach, you have experience of doing just that.
One of the great things about software is that it's being a digital product, you can sell it anywhere in the world. And in fact, in our experience, we were actually more successful early on outside of Australia than we were inside of Australia. So I think that's a really good characteristic and an opportunity that we have in this space. Of course, I think it's not easy. I think when people think about becoming a software founder and building a business, they typically think all about the product and can they build something compelling and great and exciting and so on. And in fact, that's the easy part. The real hard part is to take it to market and find out how to actually scale your business. And the examples of businesses that have done that successfully from South Africa, from Australia, are quite unique. There are many of us that really struggle. The competition is great. One of the things about software as well, being something that doesn't have a high barrier to entry. You can set up a software business overnight and build your technology on cloud systems that you just rent for peanuts, and you don't need large capital investments. But it also is highly competitive just because of that, and there's people all over the world doing that, and so you really have to try to rise above the noise, which is a challenge. But so these are some of the hard slogs that you need to go through. It's a very great community. We have all of the founders and the technology vendors in Australia are a very close community and support one another and so on. So I think there's definitely great opportunity, but it's highly competitive. Yeah.
And we talked a lot about the sort of not lax regulatory environment, but government wasn't over the top of it when you were starting out and when these startups were happening. But what about incentives, David Masters? I know that commodity miners, for example, have incentives. Should that be replicated in a similar way for this industry?
Yeah, I mean, one of the points that I've tried to make, we should treat IP like we treat minerals in the ground, in that, we want... I'm a supporter of the mining industry. It's done incredibly well by our economy and created the standard of living that we have. But we think about the minerals in the ground. We want people exploring. We want them to find them. We want them to exploit those minerals because then we get a benefit. They generate revenue. They generate profits. They generate tax. We should be thinking about IP in the same way. So how do we foster the creation of the IP, the registration of the IP, and the scaling of the IP, more importantly, out of Australia? And I think we've got to a point, and I think the point that Lucy made, like in a very short space of time, we've created a pretty massive export sector that we can now build upon. We're an industry that operates on scale, and so scale begets scale. And so now that you have operators that operate at that scale in Australia, you've got an ecosystem, you can start to see ecosystem effects. So you've got people who've built commercialization skills. So, I'll give you an example of a type of skill set that we had to import before that we're now building domestically. So, product managers. So they're people that have expertise in taking a product to market, so working with software engineers to build to meet market fit. And so that was a skill set that didn't really exist in Australia, and we had to bring that in from the US. But because we built that expertise with imported skills, we now have pipelines of product managers that come in as a grad and enter a product management stream, and we've built those people from soup to nuts in Australia. So I think once you've got that sort of scale operating, and then those people that have learned to operate at scale in Atlassian can then go across and help others to scale. So if you go into the software engineering workforce in Canva, for example, there's a lot of ex-Atlassians there because they learnt their trade craft with us, and they've taken that to Canva to help them scale. So
there's an ecosystem there, but it needs to get bigger. Is that how you feel, Asif?
I think certainly, and I agree that from a university point of view as well, that has to coexist with the ecosystem, because there should be a demand for people to absorb, and through jobs, through setting up new startups. But at the same time, I see the need in the universities, which we probably have started, David, about having a sort of software startup rather than just software development, project mindset to more product mindset. And that brings what Terry mentioned about that, the commercialization stuff. So we have sort of started now in our software engineering program in a way. So it's not about project delivery, it's about also the product and commercialization, IP protection, the market segmentation. So I believe we have to think about the ecosystem when we're even teaching as well. One thing I want to mention here, I do feel the need of stress on the digital infrastructure. I think we need to have a strong digital infrastructure. It's great to have a physical infrastructure the way we have, but I believe that would enable software development all the way from somewhere in the remote area to CBD. I think people don't need to come to the city. The new hubs would be suburbs in my view. So the ecosystem would be federated, sitting in the suburbs, and those would be that tiny, I would say that the powerhouse for developing software rather than the CBD.
And when we're talking about that infrastructure, Lucy Ellis, I note that there's a lot of investment often in hard assets. We're going to still need those in a digital world. What's it going to look like? What financial levers are going to need to be pulled? How are we going to build that infrastructure?
Well, before I get to that, I think we need to make a really important distinction here. Sort of traditional software, your apps, the kind of products that you've been making, they are a capital light business, in the sense that you can rent your cloud storage, you need a few laptops, but it's a pretty capital light industry. And so the barriers to entry are low. That means you do get entry, you do get competition, you do get innovation, and you do get productivity growth. Where there is a little bit of a concern to be raised is, of course, we're now moving into an AI world where it's actually extremely compute intensive. The data center construction phase. Like part of that is, for cloud computing, which is actually capital saving. You don't have to have on-premises servers. It's actually energy saving from the perspective of a country like Australia if everyone went to the cloud instead of being on-premises. But increasingly, you've got AI, you've got an oligopoly of the foundational models. In the same way that in the social network era, you have networks. So anything that has network effects or very large sort of initial capital investments inherently has barriers to entry. And therefore you don't have the entry, the competition, and therefore you don't get the innovation at the same pace overall, as a rule of thumb, that you would where you've got, in some ways, a harder industry. It's hard to compete when there's so many other people entering, where you've got to really compete for space. But that means you've got to keep competing and build that better mousetrap, that better app. So in many ways, a switch to a more oligopolistic model that's more capital heavy. Firstly, that does actually mean we are, I'm not concerned about the funding for that physical investment, because the amount of money that is being thrown at, by the hyperscalers at data center production, whether that's in the US or elsewhere. I mean, some of these facilities are just enormous. But there is actually an implication for the level of competition and the growth rate of productivity by pivoting solely to something that's dependent on either network effects, which is the drag we've had for the last decade or so, and or something that involves and a massive balance sheet, because you've got a massive physical capital requirement, as in the hyperscalers. So let's hope the traditional software industry continues to thrive on that basis, because that's actually got the fruits of stronger productivity growth.
Do you see a polarization then between the really big players, and we can talk about the Mag 7 on the on Wall Street, and people trying to crack this nut now?
I think where we're heading is the sweet spot will be using those AI tools as a service or as an enhancement of the original software idea. And we're already seeing that. I mean, obviously, Canva and Atlassian, but all of those sort of traditional software as a service in the cloud offerings is adding AI capability, and they're doing that because that's where the foundational model is now. And again, the economic history will tell you that in the end, the end benefits are actually reaped by the users, and that might be the software, the traditional software providers using the AI tools, or it might be the end users. But we saw during the first computer wave and the internet wave in the late 90s, we saw a huge amount of investment go into spectrum and go into, cabling, fibre optic cabling. Not all of that got used initially. A lot of it was sort of overinvestment, and eventually it got used. And, already in financial markets, people are talking about, are we overdoing this, already? Is this, is this 1999 already again? I mean, bubble's kind of an unhelpful phrase. It's just, are we in an overinvestment phase that we're going to have regret? Because, is the value going to be reaped by that oligopolistic hyperscaler sector, or is it going to be reaped by the end users? History would say the end users, and for our living standards, we should hope that's the case. But history may not always repeat.
David, you've been nodding profusely during Lucy's piece there. Do you have experience you can add from Atlassian?
Yeah, I think where we sit in the sort of application stack, I mean, we are sort of the benefits of that capital investment, but we're not taking the risk ourselves in that capital investment. So there's a lot of money flowing into that. There's a lot of innovation occurring. We can take that innovation and figure out how useful it is to our end users. So I think that's the sweet spot for us, and I think actually it's a sweet spot for Australia. We're pretty good at figuring out how to use things. I think we were talking just before, Lucy, that we're kind of a problem solver sort of society, and I think that's where as this capital is being invested, a lot of it's going elsewhere. It's not just in Australia. There's a lot of probably the numbers in the US are astronomical, but we'll get a proportion of that investment. And to Lucy's point, I think actually we should be attracting as much data center investment as we can get, and that we can efficiently deploy, because we'll utilise that infrastructure at some point. And you saw that sort of build out that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, that capacity was utilised. In fact, actually often some inefficient business models that fell by the wayside led to actually new business models that emerged during the sort of 2010s, for example. So I think that there's an important piece where we should be attracting as much of that capital as we can get, because that infrastructure will be utilised. But I think where the real sweet spot is figuring out how to utilise those underlying foundational models in user scenarios, and that's where we're focused.
Well, so that's sort of the physical aspect of it and the capital aspect. But when it comes to AI, Asif, how do you see it being used as a tool for your students, and then in the real world when we're talking about software developers?
Certainly. So first of all, we do need the technical foundation. Without that, I mean, AI could be used for generating code, probably specs, for certain other purposes. Automation, vibe coding, people look at that. All good, but universities need to put a probably emphasis on that, the technical foundation. What if something goes wrong? And I think that's where the software engineering and technical skill comes into play. Can you troubleshoot it? I mean, someone can, I call citizen developers, can develop code or generate code using automation tools, but when it comes to troubleshooting, you need people who can go beyond that large language model. So we do need basic skills. So I see that technical foundation, we're going to keep doing that. But also we're going to give students, before they get to the market, to be able to use those commercial tools, AI tools, so they're ready, job ready, they could be, should be able to use those tools and be productive. So those things, when they do onboarding, they don't see that as the foreign thing. So we have to balance at the university technical foundation with the AI engineering. But AI engineering, I would certainly say that is taking a leap in the next 3-4 years. And that part of that would be also, we have still COBOL programs, right? Mainframe still there. So I was talking to another bank, and they are going through a legacy code migration. And that's where AI could be used to generate specs out of that. So we can understand, because for me, software is not a piece of code, it's the actual business. If you look at the financial services, the banks are simply a software. If you look at the public sector, another bigger consumer of the software, they don't sell kind of commodities the way we go to the retail, they are a software. So I believe that in that sense, we needed to run two worlds. It's pretty much like when you are onboarding a new software, you have to run in parallel the traditional legacy software piece as well. And we have to do that way, software engineering point of view. So, so we want to make sure we have people coming out with solid skills. People should be able to evaluate software. Generating code is maybe a 5% of the whole thing, but we need a 95% of other stuff, which is the writing specs. I mean, you can use Gen AI, but someone will be accountable for those specs. And then code can be written using Gen AI against those specs, but someone needs to validate whether code meets those specs. I was just looking at one of the videos. I'm going to wrap up on that. Prompt engineering is dead, specs is everything. I really liked that line a few days ago on AI engineering conference.
Terry, what's your experience? How did you scale up the business so quickly? It wasn't the world of the AI sort of, you know, when you started, but it's here now. How would it have changed things for you, perhaps?
In our case, we were, as a small business, we took the path that is a bit least traveled, and we tried not to take investment right up front. We got a little bit of grant money from the government, which was really useful and valuable. But we realized that the best money that and funding we should get for our business was customers. So the product that we produced had a global community of practitioners, and we got deeply involved with those practitioners and got to know them all around the world, and through them got into very large global logos and brands adopting our software. So it was almost by infiltration that we did that. We got incubated by a few of those large organizations that bought into our idea, and we managed to grow the business in that way. I think if I think of what's changed and what I see right now with the promise of AI, you know, change is opportunity, but it's also disruptive. And this is exponential opportunity and exponential disruption right now. It's really difficult. For a software vendor right now, we're all scrambling to try and catch up and figure out what does it actually mean, what do we do with it, how do we put it into our products, and just as soon as we get a plan, the next generation comes out and we've been punched in the face, as Mike Tyson says. So I think that's the situation. I think what we're seeing right now is a period of really turbulence while we all work out how we transition through this and what the next generation of software is going to be. I think there's huge change coming. I think the question of centralization around those, consolidation around those few organizations that really own the foundation of it all is is a huge risk, because anything you do on the periphery could quite easily suddenly be swallowed up by them. So you really have to go back to your expertise. Like, software is just a mechanism. What is it? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your domain? Be a domain expert, and that's your moat. You know, the software vendor is never going to become a domain expert in your domain. Just what we need to do now is not figure out how to do what we used to do better, but do things differently with this new software to address the problems of our domain. And I think if we approach it that way, we're going to find great opportunities.
And I've got some great questions coming through here, but Lucy, before we get to them, I just want to ask you, how do you see AI improving productivity inside an organisation in this sector?
Great question, Alicia, and there's sort of the micro answer to that and as well as the macro one. And just by way of example, the micro answer is I actually report to the head of data, digital and AI for the institutional bank at Westpac. So the economics team is considered part of that, you know, data insights, AI, and we are all up for, you know, AI. And, you know, my boss actually tried to do a bot, well, quite successfully actually, not just tried to, he made a little bot trained on our economics research, which of course he called Let's Ask Lucy. You know, so we're all for that, and, you know, already seeing, you know, great kind of, you know, alongside you, co-pilot, that whole thing of finding the information, you know, how do I, how do I find the terms and conditions for this product? How do I help this customer with this need? You know, what does the economics team say about this industry that I can then feed back to my customer? There's huge sort of that enterprise search, collation of information. It's enormously powerful. But Terry pointed out something really important, which is again, and again, it's a lesson of the 90s as well. It took a while to really reap those productivity benefits. You know, there was actually equipment in 1987. Bob Solow, who was a very well-known academic economist, commented an article that you could see the computer revolution everywhere but the productivity statistic. It's now known as the Solow paradox. And that was true in 1987, but by 1997 you could definitely see computers in the productivity statistics. And, you know, again, there was a massive productivity growth boom right around the Western world. And indeed, Australia's productivity growth at the time actually outstripped the US's. And a lot of people don't realise that. This is the lesson, that using the technology gives you more benefits than being the technology. But you don't see those benefits until you change your business model, until you change your business processes. It won't be enough just to say, you know, help me find that thing. It's going to be, you know, how do we completely remake how we do things? And I mean, this is something, my team and I ourselves are grappling with right now.
And I suppose that comes to the agility point that we need to teach in unis. David Masters, you were saying around the critical thinking piece, and I'll get your take as well, Asif, but I'll start with you. What do we need to teach students?
Yeah, I think it actually puts a lot of importance on the fundamentals, because if we're going to be relying on AI agents and LLMs to be doing certain functions, then we need to interrogate what it is they're doing, and we need to understand what it is they're doing. So you're going to need people with those critical thinking skills. I actually think it kind of goes back to the core purpose of universities, which is to teach knowledge and to teach critical thinking and to teach engagement with information. And so, you know, I think where AI is going to have a lot of impact is actually in process automation and taking things that are really complicated to do and simplifying them. But you're still going to need people to sort of ensure that the output of those processes is accurate, that it's relying on data that's been interrogated and doesn't have errors in it, and just kind of like, you know, one of the challenges that I think you'll have with AI is humans have this sort of gut instinct for things that's really hard to train models to do. And so sometimes you look at something and you're like, it looks right, but there's something about it I'm not quite sure about. And so that causes you to ask a few questions and interrogate things. And so it's hard to build that into a system. But that's where humans will be really important. And I think if we think about you're seeing this in social media as well, you know, the critical thing is to teach children, young people, students, to really think about the sources of information they're getting, to look at, is it related to can they find the source of that material? Can they interrogate that? And I think AI is similar to that sort of process. We're going to need AI literacy in the same way that we need media and social media literacy.
So, Asif, what is the university's approach to getting graduates business ready in this new world? And I know we're only at the very beginning of it.
I think this is a very good question. How you make them ready? I think the foundation year, which is probably teaching you the foundation technical skills, and then building onto that, you have probably developed expertise in one of the areas, because software engineering is a big thing. There are a lot of places. And then the approaches we have at the moment, we have industry studios, or internships, or capstone, all these things happening currently. The way we are making them ready, because they get a taste of that, what's a feel like to be a part of a pressure project, planning, deadlines, managing stakeholder and communication, solving a problem, because it's not about writing a code, it's about solving a problem through the code. But I also see beyond that there will be a school to the profession. They're going to be I think they're going to be 3-4 years of direct. You're going to have a study at university, and then you're going to be waiting for the job. I don't see that going to be in the future. That's what would happen. People might be from school, they go to the workplace, and then based on their demand, they will be probably working with the university. So I think they're going to be parallel kind of learning and doing things going to happen the way the things are going in future. And at the same time, I would say that it's very important to upskill the staff as well internally. So they should be able to teach what is required in the industry. So I think that's where a university needs to have partnerships to upskilling the staff as well, not only students. And then the last thing is really important. I'm going to go back to the infrastructure. I think we have built physical labs in the universities, if you can look at that. I think we do need a digital environment, the cloud, the connectivity, the compute, the GPUs, to be able to have those labs set up there. And the university premises can be, or facilities could be used for doing project and working with the industry and your teacher. So the fundamental education might be shifting into the cloud as a delivery point of view, but actually working on a project and stuff that could be on campus. So I think there's a whole operating model going to shift, as you probably could imagine, the way we're moving forward in the next 3-4 years.
Thank you. Well, we've got the audience questions here, and I'm going to throw this one to David simply because you work for a global company that also is listed in the US. Do you think one reason why we see more AI progress in San Francisco than Australia is because of the AI regulations, or is it because of talent, or are there other reasons in your view? And panel members, feel free to pick up on this too.
Yeah, I think it's the depth of the talent pool, I think, primarily. I mean, I think if you look at, I mean, that's one of the points we're making, but, you know, the importance of having an ecosystem here, and if you want to retain talent in Australia and not have it go overseas, then you need to ensure that people have options. And so that's not one company, that's multiple companies. And so, you know, one of the challenges we had in bringing people to Australia initially was they might come and work for us, but where else do they go? Like, so if it doesn't work out with us, it's a big risk to move you and your family across, you know, from the States or from Europe to Australia. You want to ensure that you've got options. And so that's why the Valley has always been so successful. And you've seen that with AI talent now, because you've got this incredible talent pool. You've got incredible expertise that's been coming out of institutions like Stanford over a number of years. And so I think that just density of talent, density of capital as well, the storing. I think it's less to do, obviously, you know, sort of the US has sort of taken the foot off the regulatory brake completely, which is also stimulating things, but I don't think that's the core factor.
Terry or Lucy?
Yeah, well, I just comment that this is just absolute standard economics that Paul Krugman won his Nobel Prize for, you know, not quite 20 years ago, which is agglomeration. People go where the jobs are, and then the firms go where the people are, and it feeds on itself. And so that's why, you know, London is still important for both media and finance. New York is still important for finance. You know, San Francisco is very much, you know, more for tech. You know, you want to be in the country music industry, you move to Nashville. You know, the agglomeration economies feed on themselves, and so it's always going to be hard to break out from that. But ultimately, the cost of living in a big expensive city also builds, and so there is a trade-off there. And so where I think, Australia, and I wouldn't just say Sydney, I think, we forget that there's some interesting stuff going on in Melbourne, and, we actually have a big unit of, developers over up on the Gold Coast as well. But, where there's also ancillary, the fact there's a big funds management industry in Melbourne, there are sort of ancillary industries where developer talent is also useful. Financial services both in Sydney and Melbourne is also part of the story. And let's not forget defence tech either, because that's a really software intensive, integration intensive industry. And we also know that is also diversifying out of the US now because of the geopolitical environment.
And we've seen quite success with Drone Shield. I mean, that stock is, I know that's not how you measure things, but from a financial markets watcher, that stock is up 570% this year so far. I mean, they've been very successful very quickly.
We'll never ask financial advice from a macroeconomist, but I think this is an example of the point where if you have the right sort of educational levels and pragmatism around problem solving, little niches will come up, and it's not really, do we have this industry or that industry? The way a regulator is inclined to think about it is, can we pivot? And I mean, we've just seen this with Ukraine. I mean, who knew that Ukraine would be an incredible drone industry? Well, they've had to be. But it's the ability to pivot from where you are to where you need to be that's the fundamental skill.
Yeah, Terry, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's so clearly the mecca, San Francisco, the Silicon Valley for software. But all the points made, I won't try and repeat, but I think the other major value and the temptation for somebody like myself, who, once you've started here and built some software here, is that the challenge is scaling, and those are the people that know how to do it. All the talent, the people that have done that, the funders, when you go and if you're looking for funding, yes, you can find funding over here, but you can't find the expertise from those investors that you can find from the investors over there. So it is a real challenge and a huge temptation for tech.
Now, what about the importance of AI and data governance and regulatory and safety? I think this question goes to partnerships with the Asian region. It says the Asian Global South Century. What about government framework and cooperation in that space? Perhaps that is for you, David.
Yeah, look, I think we talked about patchwork regulation before, and I think that creates challenges. And one of the things that I think is incumbent on our government to talk to other governments, the more you can collaborate, it creates opportunities for companies that emerge in your jurisdiction to scale more efficiently. So the more regulatory barriers that each country implements, the less opportunity it creates to scale. And I think if you look at sort of what's happened in Europe over the last sort of 10, 20 years, there's a real conversation around competitiveness of European companies globally. And part of that is Europe is big enough to be able to build a business in Europe and not think too broadly. But also because there's so much European specific regulation, you design your company to meet those regulatory requirements that may mean you're less efficient when you operate outside of Europe. And so if you look at software as a really good example, Europe hasn't created two business-to-business software companies of the scale of Atlassian or Canva in the last 20, 25 years. It's a market of 700 million people, which it seems really odd, but I think it's a combination of some of those factors.
Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think Australian government gets a bad rap for their lack of investment in the sector. I would be adding to that perhaps in some way, but there is a lot that they do, and I think so. We benefited from the R&D tax refund, which was very, very good, and it helps to compensate for the cost of people down in this part of the world. But I think one thing that is really disappointing that they could do much more of is make it accept. Government is a huge customer for software, and particularly the type of software we had, and it is just so hard to sell to government for a small business. You can just break your business trying to go through the navigate the processes of selling to government. You can win tenders, and then 2 years later they still haven't spent the money with you. So if they would just buy our software, that would be a great help.
I know, David, that you have pushed for the R&D in tax incentive caps to be lifted from $150 million. The BCA wants something similar. How would that help?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at capital will flow where it's most efficient to deploy, and so if you're thinking about where you're making your R&D investments, you think about the regimes that operate, and there's a combination of factors like how expensive is it to hire talent, can you get access to the talent, and then once you have the talent, is it efficient to continue to employ them in those jurisdictions? And so I think that one of the challenges with the R&D tax incentive being capped is it kind of means that once we go past that cap, R&D engineers that we hire in Australia become less efficient. And so our point has been, look, if we want companies like ours to continue to scale in Australia, then you need to create incentives that allow us to continue to scale. And so an artificial cap is problematic in that regard. I think, the R&D tax incentive has been super important for us to be able to build our R&D engineering workforce in Australia. And when we talk about the scale of talent, the report that we worked on with the BCA sort of talked about the importance of having those large players in the ecosystem. So you can trace from the top 5% of R&D tax incentive claimants about 1,800 CEOs and founders across the economy. You can also then look at how those skills have been deployed elsewhere. So you can trace from about the top 5% to about 8,200 other companies across the economy. So they're an important feeding ground for talent. And so if you don't have that scale, then you don't get those ecosystem benefits. And that's the point that we're trying to make to remove some of those artificial barriers to continuing to scale those operations. It's us, it's Cochlear, it's CSL, it's ResMed. It's those companies that you want to continue to scale here.
Okay, we're getting to the end of the evening, but Asif Gill, I have a question here. What can students do if we see better opportunities in the US or Europe? People would be there as Australian players, but it's slow in adapting to AI especially. I'm not exactly sure what this questioner is getting at, but I wonder if they're just sort of positioning where the opportunities are. Should they stay here or go?
I think they should go where the opportunities are, but I think the question I'm hearing that, read between the lines, certainly there is a very slow adoption towards AI here. So if people want to do something interesting, they actually look for the place where they're being adopted. I think US is one place. We have Middle East as well. In Middle East, different countries come together and then they invest $1 trillion into that, to creating AI hub. So I think if we create opportunities here as well and partner, we are comparatively small country. If we partner with others rather than try to do everything ourselves, either US or Middle East somewhere, or neighbors are in APAC, I think that's what we need to look at, that how we can have the talent retained here. But also it's okay to go over there, learn and come back. So you can bring that mindset. I think the mindset is, in a way, is really, really important because either we are complacent to what we got it, I think we got everything in a way, or we're gonna challenge ourselves. So I think that's where things come up. And I think I'm gonna pick on the funding side as well. Increasingly, the government is reducing investment in higher education, in R&D. I think some of the work we did with our industry partners, and they're quite big now. We started small, they're big, but then went to US later on. Because we started with maybe 7, 8 people, now they went overseas. So there are many case studies, by the way, through UTS work. So I think the funding, the sustainability more, how you scale, and scaling is an option. I would say that funding point of view, or incentivize large corporates, I'm gonna say that the kind of people they hire, they are more from not the deep tech, they're more from the solution side. And there are not many R&D labs here. So I think this is important, those large corporate needs to be partner, incentivize beyond tax to be able to bring innovation here so that people can expose to that innovation, proximity being not a challenge because we can connect them remotely. So there are a few things to change.
Well, one final question, and I'm going to augment something that one of the audience members has submitted very quickly, because we've got less than 5 minutes, so about 30-second answer each. What change does the panel think is needed to scale the ecosystem here to achieve roughly $20 billion in software exports? I might start with you, Lucy.
Just keep mining the good ideas.
Terry?
I think if it's ever going to happen, it's going to happen now because there's so much opportunity right now. So I think get out there and innovate, and we can do it. Just believe, and it's not difficult. It's not going to cost you a lot. There is a fertile market out there for making your ideas something tangible and digital.
Asif?
I think ideas for sure is a starting point, but I think enablers needs to be there. Enabler, I see that the strong ecosystem and digital infrastructure. If people do not have a GPU to process the models, there's no innovation, right? And if you ask the universities around there how much GPU power they have, or do they have their own AI cloud? I'll be surprised to say if someone says yes.
David, do you have one change that could be made? Or a couple?
Yeah, probably a couple. Look, I think we just need to look outside the bubble of Australia and think about, like, are we competitive with other markets in terms of attracting, incentivising the investment in intellectual property, the registration of intellectual property and the scaling of intellectual property. So if we think about, there's a range of settings involved in that, and talent is part of that as well. So it's not one simple change, but I think it's just basically looking at where we sit from a competitive environment and are we competitive in attracting that capital and that investment.
So much deep knowledge and insights. It's an absolute privilege to have had this conversation, and I very much look forward to, as a financial journalist, leading the news bulletin with not BHP and Rio Tinto, but our software developers as the next frontier for software experts. Exports rather. But to the experts, David Masters, thank you so much for your time tonight. Asif Gill, we appreciate your time as well. Lucy Ellis, thank you so much. And Dr. Terry Roach, thank you so much for your time. If you join me in giving them a warm round of applause. So I believe that post this event, there will be an email to go out, which you will receive in your inbox, where you can provide feedback for this evening's event and offer various comments. Your feedback is really welcome. And I'm sorry to the audience members whose questions I didn't get to tonight, but I think it's safe to say we have certainly learnt a lot from our esteemed panelists on the stage here with us tonight.